good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 56th meeting of the Blood Transfusion Education and Discussion Group. My name's Jo, and I'm stepping in for Selma today, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tasha, so we're delighted to have you all with us. We are especially pleased to welcome our speakers today, Danny Gaskin and Ness Hayes. So Danny is a biomedical scientist and he's got experience across both NHS and independent hospital sectors, and he's had a variety of roles at NHS Blood and Transplant. We actually have Danny to thank for the success of this group. As some of you may know, he was instrumental in getting this group together some years ago now. So thanks, Danny. Good to see you on the other side. He's currently lead specialist for Blood Stocks Management Scheme, where his work focuses on strengthening the collaboration and relationships between hospitals and the blood services. So the aim really there is of improving the way blood inventories are managed. We have Ness, who's also a biomedical scientist with a decade of experience in NHS hospitals before joining NHS BT last year as lead specialist for Blood Stocks Management Scheme. So her aim is to use her hospital experience and insights from the blood supply chain to help hospitals interpret their issues and wastage data, as well as offering bespoke advice to assist them in improving stock management practices. We're also joined by Matt Bend. He's Blood Stocks Management Scheme Manager, who will be available during the Q&A session towards the end. So the title of today's session is Blood Stocks Management Scheme, Understanding Your Monthly Component Report. Okay, that's all from me. So thank you again for joining us, and let's hand over to you, Danny and Ness. Thank you.
So thank you, Jo. Thank you very much for having us today, and thank you to everybody for joining us, especially during Congress Week. It's good to see still relatively quite high numbers and good number of people interested in blood inventory management and the work of the Blood Stocks Management Scheme. At least in my career up to now, there's probably never been a more important time for us to focus on our management of our blood inventory. I think if we look back over the past couple of years, at very least, maintaining that healthy blood stocks has been a real challenge. And I think anyone working in transfusion or around transfusion knows the effort and some of the tough asks that have gone into maintaining the supply. So just to kick off, I just want to start by thanking all of you for your work on that and your efforts on that. Within the scheme, it doesn't go unrecognised and it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you. Today, we want to have a look at how the data that we input into the Nessa, the data management system, can help us to manage our inventory more smartly, potentially make improvements, potentially make some savings, and ultimately to support the supply chain. So every patient gets the blood that they need when they need it. So over the next hour or so, you've got me and Ness, and we're going to take a tour through the monthly component report. And we do acknowledge that amongst us today, there's going to be some that are very familiar with the report, and probably some of you have never seen the report before. So we're going to be covering all the basics. We're going to be going from top to bottom and covering everything from the ground up. So those of you who are familiar with the report, you might have also noticed that they've changed quite significantly since the new year. And perhaps there's some new stuff in there that you're not familiar with, and we're going to cover that too. But I will just say that not everything the idea isn't that you read this report, every word and every number within it, top to bottom, every month. The idea really is that we provide you with a package of data and information and insights that you can dip into as you need it, depending on your needs, depending on what your focus is, depending on what you're working towards. So we'll cover everything today, right through all four components, and also some supporting material too. From the off, I will also just add that the intention of these reports aren't just for seniors, aren't just for the lab managers. They're for everybody involved in transfusion, particularly if you're involved in ordering blood and using blood. So that's all lab staff, that's our TP colleagues, that's those who sit on the HTC, those on the HTT. anyone with Vanessa access can get them. And if you don't have Vanessa access, I recommend that seniors and managers make these available to anybody who wants to access them. This is all of our business, and managing these stocks is something we all need to be involved in. So before we get into it, just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. These are anonymous. They're going to appear as polls on the screen. This is just really just to get a gauge of where we're at as a group, how familiar we are with the reports as a group, and how useful we currently find them. So just a test question, just to make sure we know how to use it and it's working correctly. I'll just give it 10 seconds for each one. Don't worry if you're using a format of Teams that doesn't allow for this function. It's not necessary for everybody to complete. We're just getting a good idea here. Wow, divisive. Cool. I think we get the idea. Okay. Jumping into the first question then, that's specific to this session. And again, answer these honestly because they're anonymous. We don't see who's responding. This is really just to give us an idea of the frequency and the familiarity that you use and have of these reports. Okay, so we've got 145 people on the call at the moment, and less than half are using these reports monthly. And there's quite an even distribution across the other answers. So just as I was saying in that introduction there, we recognise that there is a mixed group amongst us, and that's why we're probably going to, for some of you, you're going to be seeing things that are potentially quite familiar and basic for you, but it's important that we cover everything. Okay, so how confident are you in navigating the report and finding the information that you currently need? Yeah, and this is the purpose of sessions like this. It's a new report, it's unfamiliar. So we expect actually that confidence in the new report in terms of navigating it will be low. And we hope with sessions like this and with other resources that we're working on at the moment, we can help try and flip this around a little. And just a final question before we kick off. How useful do you currently find a report for supporting your work? So for inventory management, for supporting meetings like your HTCs, etc. Again, we're expecting a mixed distribution here. And I hope, again, with increasing people's understanding of the report and confidence in using it, we can reshape the distribution of these answers too. But that's really quite encouraging to see. Okay, nice. So we'll revisit some questions at the end as well, but for now, let's get into it. So here's the reports. Hopefully you've got your copy of the report with you. If you don't worry. It's for the whole hour. It's going to appear on screen. But if you've got your report, it's quite useful to follow through and see what this information means for you and your colleagues in your hospital. But to begin with, we're going to focus on page 1, and we're going to look at that first third, the top third. So the structure of the report is the same as we move through the pages. You can see to the top left there, we've got the hospital name. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're using our test site, which is the St. Elsewhere Hospital. On your report, you should see the hospital in which you work. That numerical value in brackets next to it is what we call your pulse code. That's essentially your NHSBC customer number. If we move then across to the right, we can see the reporting period, and here we see up to July 25. What's important about this and the important date to keep in mind is the 12th of each month. So the 12th of each month is the cutoff for the previous month. So this report for July 25, I will have received in August 12th. So it's important that when we're inputting our data, we're getting it in before the 12th of each month so that we've got a complete set of data for the month that's going to be reported. So when we're talking, as we go through this report, we're going to be referring to the previous month and the previous 12 months. What we're looking at there is up to the end of July for month, and the previous 12 months from August 24 to July 25. If we have a look under that, we've got the current BSMS user groups, and these are based on a weighted 5-year average of annual issues. And this is essentially how we group you into cohorts based on your annual issues. As you can see here, the St. Elsewhere Hospital is a high user for red cells and for platelets, and a moderate user for the frozen components, so for FFP and cryo. There are 5 different groups that you can be grouped into: very low, low, moderate, high, and very high. So whilst St. Elsewhere is a high user of components, there are certainly other hospitals that are using more, receiving more issues than us. Just to give you an idea of the difference between the categories, for red cells, in order to be in the very high user group, we're looking at sites with over 10,000 annual issues. So they, usually you're quite large city hospitals, and for the very low, we're looking at less than 500. So your smaller district hospitals, and many hospitals within the independent sector also sit within that. And the purpose of user groups really is to give us a basic opportunity to help us benchmark against hospitals of similar size, of similar usage, and that can be really quite useful, as we'll see as we move through the reports. Scrolling down the report a little, we come to what we call the key metric feedback. Again, this is still on page 1. You can see we've got 4 subheadings there: consistent submissions, reducing wastage, etc., etc. And we've got those 2 table rows at the bottom, one with an orange header, one with a blue header. Let's start with them because they're nice and easy to get out of the way. The orange table, suggested actions and messages. This is where we will share with you each month what we think is significant information, significant updates, access to new resources. You can see in July we shared our invitation for expressions of interest to join the BSMS steering group. Thank you to those of you who responded to that. Next month it might be something completely different. It might be specific to a component, it might be specific to a group. Always worthwhile checking that box. Moving over to the blue table, contact us. What can we say about that? That's essentially our contact information. You can contact us at any time for support with anything, whether it's the interpretation of these reports, whether it's something technical, absolutely anything. Please feel free to contact us and we will help where we can. Okay, so if we move then to these 4 highlight sections here, the first one, submissions, consistent submissions. Here we're talking about our performance against the minimum recommendation for inputting our data into Ness. So currently we ask that for red cells, we are making 15 entries per month in relation to our stock. And for wastage, we're looking at 1 entry per month. And we can see here that when we look at the previous 12 months for the St. Elsewhere Hospital, we achieved a 91.7% submission completion for red cell wastage and 100% for red cell stock. So we're doing fairly well. And, we're probably looking at, we're missing 1 entry for the wastage across that 12-month period. Just an important update on that, just take the opportunity to share this with you. This has been the recommendation for some time, 15 entries for stock, 1 for wastage. We recently increased that. So from September 2025, we've updated our minimum recommendation from 15 to 20 for red cell stock submissions, and 1 for wastage. Remains the same. For platelets, FFP and cryo, the minimum recommendation is 1 wastage submission per month. So do keep that in mind, and we have arranged for correspondence and some communications directly to you to make you aware of that. Moving on to reducing wastage, here we're thinking about our overall WAPI. For those of you not familiar with the term WAPI, it stands for wastage as a percentage of our issues. This is essentially a sort of non-specific high-level view of our wastage performance. We do have some KPIs for red cell WAPI and for platelets WAPI. So we're looking at 2.5% for red cells, and for platelets it's 5%. So we can see here that for red cells we're within target. But for platelets slightly over, and this is where we start thinking about how we use this report. So we can see here that we're slightly over the KPI, and that might prompt us now to look at the platelet report, which is in a few pages time in a little bit more detail, and we will do that as we move through. Moving on to appropriate stock management. This time we're looking at what we call the ISI. That's your issuable stock index. That's expressed as a number, and that relates to the number of days of stock that you currently hold for that group. And that's based on your past usage. So this one is quite significant. It's linked to wastage because we know that time expiry is the leading cause of red cell wastage. And we often see a correlation between a high ISI and time expiry wastage. So it's worthwhile keeping this one in mind. The KPIs for ICI do change ever so slightly depending on which user group we're in. So here we can see elsewhere is within the KPI thresholds for ICI for a high user. And again, we cover this in more detail as we get through each individual report for each component. And finally on this page, balancing issues across multiple routine weekly deliveries, a slightly more complex metrics which shows us which days of the week platelet orders are most frequently received. So when we come to looking at platelets in more detail, Ness will talk us through how we can use this data quite smartly really to plan our ordering around our clinical needs and our clinics. But here we can see over the previous 6 months, the St. Elsewhere Hospital, they most frequently had deliveries of platelets on a Wednesday. 20% of their platelets were delivered on a Wednesday, and you compare that with Saturdays, which was the lowest at 9%. So that's our key metric data. Scrolling down and we see the first tables of many in the report. Table 1 is a more visual representation of our data entry participation that we've just talked about. We can see here that this is the July report, so it still talks about 15 entries, but a reminder that is now 20. And perhaps just a quick opportunistic reminder to remind you about the zero wastage button. So if you don't have wastage, as in zero wastage is you wasted 0 units this month, it's not enough just to not input anything. And not inputting something will just be recorded as a no entry. And so if you're in Vanessa, you will see that there is a zero wastage button. You need to click that. It might be quite common to see where we've got here this wastage data entry. We've seen for 11 out of 12 months, they've been St. Elsewhere staff have been inputting that data. And for 1 month, it looks like they've forgotten to do that. And perhaps that was the reason for that. Table 2, this shows issue data for each component over the last 2 months. We've also got a breakdown by group and our year-on-year trend. And this is quite useful. And we see an upward trend, demonstrated by these arrows here. So we've got green, which is downwards year on year, and red is obviously an increase. Upward trends, they could reflect changes to activity, new services. Backlog patients is a common one at the moment. Changes in practice, perhaps non-compliance with standard operating procedures when it comes to ordering. So it's really useful to keep these in mind and really think about what it's prompting us to think about. If we look at this St. Elsewhere example, generally we are seeing a year-on-year increase across all components. I think particular interest to me is the OD neg red cells is up while the other groups are down. That prompts me to think, well, why is that? Do we know why this might be? Is this unexpected? Is this expected? Perhaps we're now providing services to HEMS, the helicopter services, or perhaps we've got some new satellite fridges. Why is this? And if we don't understand why this is, it's worth it's a prompt for us to start to think about, well, let's have a look at the data and try to understand that. And that's the purpose of these highlight sections. We can also see that platelets are up overall. Use of AD neg platelets is significantly down. Again, is that deliberate? Is that a change in practice? Do we know what's happening here? We look at FFP. We're using a lot more FFP, a lot more AB FFP. Again, we're thinking about why this might be. Does it fit our expectations? Does it align with what we know locally? Can we explain these changes? Do we need to explore these changes? Does it highlight an opportunities for us to reduce some stock holding? Does it highlight an opportunities to reduce stock holding of certain groups? Is there an opportunity to think about if those sort of high spec, high demand groups are being used appropriately? So this is an opportunity at a glance to see that information. So still on page 1, scrolling down now, we're coming to the end of the highlight data. This one, this first table is around components WAPI, handily color coded, so you can see red is above the KPI, too high. Green is within the threshold, and no color is where we currently don't have a KPI. So we can see here compliance for red cells really quite good. Perhaps for platelets, we've got some questions to be asking ourselves and thinking about why that might be. Perhaps this might prompt us to think about whether we're overstocking platelets, perhaps something to think about. As we move through this table, we can also see a really handy piece of information about the cost of this wastage. This is a rolling figure, this total cost. So this is the rolling figure over the previous 12 months. I personally think this is a very valuable one for our governance meetings, for our HTCs, etc. And in time, we're going to be publishing a case study of a hospital that was able to use this data, particularly around the frozen components, to secure some funding for some TEG equipment. So that's just an example of how that data might be used at those high-level meetings. As we move down, we're now looking at ISI. Remember, that's issuable stock index, the number of days of stock we have of any one group at a time. And this is generally looking at our stock holding. Looking generally quite good. The target range across here, that's again based on our user group. So we're the high user group. And you can see here, generally, we're doing quite well. We look at our 12-month ISI, and typically over a year, we're doing quite well. If we look at July specifically, again for OPOS, ONEG, APOS, doing quite well, quite typical. But we see a slight spike here, and again for BNEG, and again it's asking ourselves the questions: does this prompt us to think? Do we know why this is? Was this patient specific? Is this a change in practice? Is this a new member of staff? Is this an ordering error? Is this some mismanagement of stock? We can really start to use this data to start those conversations and to explore why this might be. And that's our summary page, page 1, summary page. It provides our really useful snapshot of the key data, the headline figures, some high-level takeaways, and hopefully some prompts for further reading of the data that follows. And I think at very least, anybody involved in inventory management within your lab across the hospital should at least take a look at this page each month when it comes out. The next page focuses on red cells, and we start to look at some of the data in more detail. And this is the data that leads into those highlight figures we've just been speaking about. Again, we see a similar format: the reporting month at the top, the user group, our hospital name, etc. And you'll see now that it's now color coded. It's a red frame, indicating that we're now talking about red cells. So if we look at this top chart, this A, B, and our WAPI benchmarking versus user group, we've got a nice line across here. We've got this horizontal line just under where it says user group. That's our target, so 2.5% WAPI target. Remember, WAPI is wastage as a percentage of issues. And there's some symbols that we can use to get a good glance of where we're at. So we've got this blue circle here, which is our year average. We can see for our year average, we're bang in the middle of that cluster there, well within the target threshold, really doing quite well. And the other sites are the grey diamonds. So we can see the other high users spread across this line. And again, we're performing, probably around average there amongst the main cluster. And we can see where we fit in terms of position amongst them in terms of how high that WAPI is, and we're sat 23 at 46, which we can really visually see. What we don't see and what we should see is a pale blue circle, which indicates our previous month's performance. So we should see this blue one, which is our year, and then we should see a pale blue one, which indicates our performance in the last month, so for July. But it's not there, and I wonder if anybody understands why that's not there. Has any idea why that might not be there? Chat box. Yeah, some people are saying you've got it on your last report, and it should be there. It should be there. It's not hidden by the year average. But the answer lies in this next part. So if we see these green squares across here, there's two columns here. One is about our data entry performance for stock. One is our data entry performance for wastage. So we can see, remember, for stock, St. Elsewhere staff don't miss a month. They're always hitting that target 12 month. They've got green squares right across the year. And generally, they're really good at the wastage as well. But something slipped in July, didn't it? They didn't submit something. Perhaps they didn't press the zero wastage button. And so we don't actually have any wastage data for July. And in order for us to calculate WAPI, we need that issues data and we need the wastage data. So this is just a reminder that a lot like the results that we're producing in the lab, the output is only as useful and reliable as what we put in. So without that data, we can't report on performance. So this is just a reminder that hitting these targets really does allow us to produce the best reports for you and to give you the information that you need. So moving on down the red cell page, we start to see some raw data in regards to red cells. We see each of the previous 12 months. We can see there how many times the staff at the hospital have entered stock into Vanessa. So you can see they're doing really well with that. Most days that they're inputting stock, they're obviously doing that on a daily basis. Some hospitals do that monthly, some do it weekly. You can see here that they're doing that daily. We can see from the ISI that the stock holding is fairly consistent. Okay, and here is the sort of nominal figures of stock held. We've got some issues data, and then we've got some wastage data here, and we can see in more detail here. So if we go across July, we can see that stock was inputted, but wastage entries was 0, and therefore we have no information on wastage, and that explains the red square above and the lack of the blue circle on the performance chart. Okay, moving down to the bottom of page 2 now, we've got 4 bar charts. The first of which, top left, is about gross issues. This shows a number of issues received from the blood service. The different colours and the different textures just relate to the different blood groups, which you can see in the key there. And the dashed line is your user group average. And obviously, by the nature of averages, it's clear that some are going to be above, some are going to be below, and we're kind of sitting quite nicely there. We are slightly above the average. That doesn't necessarily mean we're using too much. It doesn't necessarily mean we're performing badly. But again, it might prompt us to ask why we might receive more units than other hospitals within our user group. So how are we looking against the KPIs? What's the trend saying? Have we got some complex activity that requires more? It's worth thinking about. It's about prompting those questions. Moving on to the second bar chart, so the one on the right, again, the red and beige coloured charts, similar structure to the gross issues ones, but now we're looking at wastage. And once again, the different colours and textures relate to the different blood groups. And again, the dashed line shows us that user group average. And we can see that performance fluctuates somewhat. And we can also see that there in July, we are missing data. We don't have a bar at all. Moving down now to WAPI. So again, we're looking at wastage again here, but this time as a percentage of issues. And these bar charts change colour. Again, if you see green, it's compliant with the KPI, and red would indicate it is not. We can see here that for high users, the WAPI target is 2.5%. We can see here that 2.4% is the peak, down to 0.2%. And again, we see nothing here. So what's interesting with these is we can see a fluctuating performance here. So we do need to explore whether or not this data is reliable, because we might take at face value, or somebody might take this report at face value and say, oh, well done in July for 0 wastage. We just need to make sure that we're applying some interpretation to that. And perhaps a more specific measure of the wastage is this fourth one, the bottom fourth quadrant here. On the right hand side, and this is the breakdown of the reason for wastage. So you can see here that we've got some time expiry in green. In red, we've got some miscellaneous. But at St. Elsewhere, we have a significant disproportionate amount of out of temperature control wastage. That certainly prompts us to start thinking about why that might be. and trying to understand why a lot of our wastage is as a result of out of temperature control. Where is that occurring? Is this an education issue? Is blood being taken out from satellite fridges, not either being used or returned? Is it major hemorrhage blood, etc.? So we need to start thinking about why that might be, and this graph provides that prompt for us to think about that. And that's the general red cell focus. We can go into a little bit more detail and look specifically at all neg red cells now. So a lot of this is the same, but we're specifically looking at all neg now. So again, we've got that same structure to the report. We're red because we're still red cells. Again, we've got this benchmarking tool, and again, we're missing the previous month for the same reasons. This table gives us a bit of a more detailed insight into some of the data. And there's some really useful insights we can take from this. So obviously we can take the no entry from here. But if we look closely and we look at, let's say, August 24, and we can see here our request figures as well, not just what we're being issued, but what we're requesting. And we can see here that in August, we only requested 34 units of ONEG, but in fact, we received 44. So again, that prompts us to think about why that might be. And one of the common reasons for this is obviously substitutions and not being able to fulfill sort of high spec orders when we start thinking about RO, etc. And we can take some really useful insights from this section. So it is worth having a look closely at these figures and seeing what we can take from that. As we move down the ONEG focus, we can see some of that data visually in two bar charts, left and right hand side. That shows how our O negative request and wastage compares with the other groups. ONEG is shown in red. And then to the bottom left is a very nice visual of sort of what proportion of our total red cell orders are O negative and how that compares with other hospitals within our group and how that changes over time as well. So we can see in March and April, maybe May 25, a bit of a spike. We're ordering more ONEG than, or at least receiving, requesting more ONEG than usual and certainly over the average. And if we look at the wastage of ONEG, we can also see that reflected there. So this is an example of how different parts of the report can sort of supplement our understanding and the interpretation of other areas. And finally, on the final part of page 3, the ONEG focus is just looking at wastage in a little bit more detail. So similar to the previous, that first one is looking at WAPI over the previous 12 months. We can see that fluctuates, sometimes close to 5% and occasionally down to 0. And again, at first glance, that looks like a really good performance. But again, we need to explore them zeros. We already know that July was because of no entry. Okay, moving on to the second chart, the reasons. Again, this is really useful to understand the reasons why we're wasting ONEG. When we look at this and we look at that previous chart, we can see actually that perhaps a lot of that OCCOL wastage, that out of temperature control wastage, is ONEG. Now, is that blood being held in satellite fridges and being taken out and not used, not returned? It prompts us to ask those questions, and it can really guide interventions to try and reduce that. And finally, we're looking at the ONEG ISI trend, and we see here 2 years. So we've been looking at 1 year for the most part, but here we can see a trend over 2 years. Again, color-coded against the KPI for our high user group, in which St. Elsewhere are, and we can see following a spike in late 23, it looks like there might have been some intervention. Perhaps they saw our report and thought we've got to do something about that. And you can see since then, there's been a general trend downwards and they've been compliant since. So we can see there how we're performing with our ONEG. And that is the red cell focus of the report. And I'm going to hand over now to Ness, who'll take us through some of the platelets and frozen components.
So I'm going to take you through the rest of our reports. So that includes platelets, frozen components, and the appendix and glossary as well. So if we come to page 4, this is our platelet report. So the colour banner at the top has changed to yellow following the colour scheme that runs throughout the report for the different components. The top left has got your hospital name and pulse code. You've got the calendar month that the report was generated for at the top. And there's a reminder of your user group on the top right there as well. And just to remember that it's calculated based on your average issues. Therefore, the user groups across the 4 components might not necessarily be the same. Underneath that, we have our platelet benchmarking. So as we use WAPI, wastage as a percentage of issues, as our KPI for wastage, on that scale, you can see your previous month's performance in the light blue circle, your yearly average performance in the dark blue circle, and also you can see the yearly average of the other members of your user group in the grey diamonds. And on this scale, you have a target with the black line. So in this case, for platelets, it's 5%. So you want to be further left is best on that scale and on the left of that target. You also have the yearly average position as a figure on the right-hand side there. So you can see where you rank compared to the other members of your user group as well. Underneath that, we have our data entry monitoring. For platelets, we encourage platelet stock data to be submitted to us, but this isn't one of our key recommendations because we do appreciate that not all hospitals have platelets in stock and just order on a named patient basis. So if you do stock platelets, then this is encouraged, but if you don't stock platelets, then you don't need to submit this data to us. But we do ask for wastages data for platelets every month, and this is 1 entry into Vanessa per month. So if you achieve that, then your target will turn to green for that month. But if that's not achieved, then it will be red for that month. So you can follow your data participation over the past 12 months there. Underneath that, you have your platelet statistics table, and this is broken up into 3 sections for stock, issues, and wastage. So like I say, if you do stock platelets, then we do encourage you to enter this data to us into Vanessa, so you can see how many times this was done over the previous months. Then next you have your issues data. So gross issues is everything that NHS BT has issued to you. And net issues is if you've recorded any platelet movements within Vanessa, either as stock or with a patient, then that will be reflected there. So net issues is your gross issues minus any movements. Then on the right-hand side, you've got your wastage information. So the number of wastage entries into Vanessa each month, the total number of platelets that were wasted each month, how many of these platelets were wasted due to time expiry, and then your WAPI calculation as well. Then finally, at the end, you've got your user group WAPI for that month, so you can compare the numbers between yourselves and the user group. And just to remember, we can only calculate WAPI when we do receive wastage information from yourselves. So if we don't receive that information, then it will be recorded as no entry in that table. Moving down to your graphical representation for platelets. The top left graph is your gross issues by blood group. So you can see the number of issues by the height of the bars, but also you can see the proportion of blood group by the different colours and textures within those bars as well. Then the top right is your total wastage by blood group. So again, height of the bar is the number of units wasted, but the colours of the bars and the different textures shows you the proportion of the blood groups that were wasted, so you can monitor trends over time. The bottom left graph looks complicated, but actually provides you with a lot of information. So this is your monthly issues on the day of the week. So the x-axis there is your days of the week, Monday through to Sunday, and the y-axis is your percentage of monthly issues. So what this is showing you is the proportion of all your platelets that you've been issued and what day of the week these fell on. And this allows you to see whether you have a particularly busy day or a day that is more quiet. And you can do this over the past 6 months. So the different coloured bars there are indicating the previous 6 months. So like I say, in this example, we can see that the busiest day for this particular hospital is Wednesday, and we can see that the least busiest day is a Saturday. So most hospitals do have increased activity on weekdays and less so at the weekends, but you can see what your busiest and least busiest days are locally. The reasons for increased issues on a particular day are either due to trauma or major hemorrhage, perhaps at the weekend, or if you accept pre-orders of platelets, then we usually see this as a spike before a clinic day. So in this example, this particular hospital has got increased issues on a Wednesday. So if they did accept pre-orders, these will be issued to them and delivered the day before, ready for that clinic to go ahead on the Thursday. Whereas the opposite for Sunday could be true. It could be due to more patients coming in through the door needing platelets transfusion. Another way you could use this graph is if you're exploring the idea of holding stock platelets. So like I said, not every hospital does hold stock platelets, and it's a local decision based on your patient need. And it's to explore the idea that just because you hold stock platelets, it doesn't necessarily need to be every day of the week. It's for whenever you have most activity and whenever your patients come in that need it. So if you weren't thinking of stocking them every day of the week, then this graph will show you the day that you are busiest in terms of platelet issues, and it will give you an indication as to when those stock platelets are most likely to be used. So in this example, Wednesday is a high issue day, either due to pre-orders for a clinic or potentially more patients coming through. So if you were to order platelets in for stock, then you want to make sure that these are expiring roughly around the Wednesday, because there is most chance of those platelets being used up on a patient and not being wasted. So although it looks complicated, it can give you a lot of information about your platelet activity. And the last graph on this page, the bottom right, is your platelet wastage by category. So you can see, again, the height of the bar, the number of units wasted, and the different colours will show you what that reason was. So most hospitals have platelet wastage due to STEX, stock time X, which is the dark green, or medically ordered not used, which is the light blue. And this graph will allow you to track wastage trends over time, either by reason or by number, and it will potentially prompt you to have a look into the clinical area or speciality where this wastage is occurring to see if there's any offer or help could be supportive of that area. Page 5 of the report is one of our newer pages in this version, and this is the A negative focus. So this is particularly helpful for those hospitals that do stock A negative platelets, but also interesting for those who want to make sure that they're using their A negative platelets in the best way. So similarly, the colours changed to orange, but still on that yellow spectrum to highlight that we're still with platelets. And you've got the same information at the top in terms of your hospital name, pulse code, and user group category for that component. Underneath there, you've got your A negative WAPI benchmarking. So the principle is exactly the same as the other components, but the difference is that we don't have a specific target for A negative wastage. So there's no target to be sat the left of, as is the case for red cells and platelets. So you've just got your previous month's performance, your yearly average, and the other site's yearly average there as well. Underneath that, you've got your A negative statistics table. So on the left, you've got your issues information, and on the right, you've got your wastage information. So moving from left to right, you've got your total number of requests of platelets, then you've got your A negative requests, then your A negative issues, therefore the requested percentage of A negative for yourselves, and then also for the user group as well. So you can use those last two columns to see how you sit from an A negative point of view. And if you wanted to see about your A negative substitutions, then you could compare the A negative requests to the A negative issues to see how NHSBT are fulfilling your requests. Then the wastage information on the right, you've got the number of wastage data entries into the Ness, the total number of platelets that were wasted, how many of these were A negative, the A negative WAPI, and then the A negative user group WAPI as well. Your graphical representation for A negative is similar to the O negative focus page for red cells. So the top left there, you can see how many of your platelet requests are made up of A negative. So in the top bar chart, the grey bars are the number of platelets that were requested, and the yellow shaded areas are how many of these were A negative. Then underneath that, you've got your rolling moving percentage of A negative requests, and you can compare that to your user group there to visually see how you perform compared to the other members of your group. The top right graph is your A negative wastage. So the grey bars are highlighting your total platelet wastage, and the yellow shaded areas are how many of these platelets were A negative. Then the bottom left graph is your A negative WAPI trend. So as I said earlier, there isn't a specific target for A negative WAPI, so you can just monitor these numbers over time. But just to bear in mind that those zeros at the bottom either could be due to genuine zero wastage for A negative, or it could be due to no data submitted into the Ness. So you may need to cross-reference that graph to the top right graph to see whether that zero is genuine or not. The bottom right graph is your A negative wastage by category. So similarly for platelets, the category names are the same, and you can see what the reasons are for your A negative wastage. And again, monitor these over time and potentially do some further investigation at a local level to figure out what's causing this wastage. Moving on to frozen components now. So this is page 6, second to last page of the report, and we group frozen components together. So in the top right corner, you can see a user group for FFP and for cryo. And again, these might not necessarily be the same if you use these two components differently. Underneath that, we've got the benchmarking. So you've got your FFP benchmarking on the left and your cryo on the right. We don't have targets for frozen components due to the different variation of hospital activity and levels of usage within the countries. So we just have your yearly average in the dark blue circle and your other members of the user group in the grey diamonds as well there for you. But still, the same rule of thumb applies, and that further left is best, as that indicates better performance and lower wastage. Underneath that, you've got your data entry into Vanessa. So similarly for platelets, we do encourage stock data for frozen components to be entered into Vanessa, but this isn't one of our key recommendations or a key performance indicator. What is a key performance indicator is wastage data. So you can see there whether you submitted that one entry into Vanessa for frozen component wastage per month. Underneath that, you've got your frozen component statistics. So the FFP information is on the left and the cryo information is on the right, but the actual information for both components is the same. In that you've got your gross issues, your group AB issues, the number of wastage data entries into Vanessa, the total number of units that were wasted, and then how many of these were group AB. The graphical representation is orientated slightly differently to the other components in that you've got your FFP graphs on the left and cryo graphs on the right. So if we take the top left graph there, that is your FFP gross issues. So again, height of the bars is the number of units, and the different colours and textures of those bars will give you the proportion of the blood group. And does that fit in with your usage and your patient demographic? Is that what you expect? The bottom right graph there is your wastage by category. So as you can see here, most of this hospital's wastage is due to thawed for major hemorrhage not use, which is very typical, but you will be able to see what your wastage is over time and monitor any trends. On that example there's a small amount of SDL, which is split damage leaked. So we don't see that very often because we do all take into account how fragile those frozen components are when they are still frozen, but it does occasionally happen, so we can see a small amount of that. What we don't see very often here at BSMS is time X wastage for frozen components. So as the frozen components have such a long shelf life while still frozen, they don't tend to reach expiry while still in stock in the freezer, so we don't see an awful lot of time expiry. But it's just a prompt to make sure that staff entering wastage data are aware of what the correct categories are and what those categories mean to make sure that your wastage is being recorded correctly. If we look at the top right graph now, this is the similar information but for cryo this time. So again, you can see the number of issues and also what the blood group mix of those issues is. And then underneath there, you can see your wastage by category, and the categories for frozen components are the same. If we come to the last page of the report, this is your appendix and glossary. So this is your reference sheet if you need a reminder about what any of the terms mean within the report. So the top section is our thresholds for the different user groups, so you can have an idea about what your annual issues need to be to fit into a certain user group for the components. Then underneath that, we've got a reminder of our KPIs for red cells and for platelets. So red cell ISI targets, and then WAPI for red cells and for platelets as well. Then lastly, at the bottom, you've got a reminder about what some of our terms and definitions mean, such as gross and net issues, or ABO versus A, B, and O, and what we mean when we say those two terms in the report. And on the right-hand side there, you've got a reminder of what the wastage acronyms mean as well, should you need a reminder. So that's all of the pages of the component reports. I'm going to pass back to Danny now, who's going to take you through a few of the resources to help you get the most out of your component report.
Lovely. So what we've been through today has been sort of a basic guide through how to navigate and interpret some of the information in the report. And there's been a lot of information to take away, and we realise that, you know, you're not going to take everything that we've said away and fully understand straight away. So we have produced some supplementary information. We've produced this BSMS monthly component guide in SWAY, which will essentially go through what we've gone through today. And you can see that it's broken down into different chapters. So each chapter refers to one of the pages as we go through. So Ness has just finished on page 7, which is the frozen products. And you can see as we go backwards, you can see what we've discussed today. And as we go through them, you'll see a breakdown of what we've just discussed today with images and with animated examples. So we'll send the link out with your certificates to that, and you can also access that from our website, and that will be communicated more widely. And similarly, I see there's some questions already posted in the Q&A, one of which is specifically what is ISI. We have a FAQ document, and that's also available for you. Here's an example of how that might look, and the specific question, what does ISI mean, and quite a detailed breakdown to what that is. We'll also post that link with your certificate, so you'll get this information on the back of this session. And here's just another example of how that looks and how you might find that useful. So again, we're looking at that missed wastage entry there and why that might have been the case, and we explain that in some detail there. So that brings us to the end of this introductory session. I will invite Ness and Matt Bend back to join us now. I think we've got a few minutes, Joe, for questions. I don't know how much you need to close, but any questions that we don't get through today, like you said, please do email them, and we'll do our best to get back to everybody.
Brilliant. Thanks, Danny and Ness, for that really deep dive, a very insightful presentation into the report. I realise we've just got 5 minutes, and I think we've got a couple of hands up and one question in the chat. So if I can just go with the question in the chat first. Somebody's asking, are HLA matched platelets included in the ANEG issues and requests? Just because they have a few ANEG patients who have HLA matched platelets, but obviously the blood group issued is more dependent on HLA match rather than blood group. So if one of you could answer that.
Yeah, I'm going to pass over to Matt for that one.
Yeah, so yes, you are correct that they are included in, so numerically, all HLA, any adult component is included in that value. However, you're right, we don't specify where that request has come from, what the option as to why you asked for it, what you got in return. The reason we include ANEG requests and issues in that data table is the same that we do for ONEG red cells, because you may have another reason why you asked for it. So that difference between the request value and the issues value is an important one. But at the moment, we don't have access to the HLA data that will allow us to include it. That is a future aspiration, so we can dive a little bit deeper into what we're showing you. But at the moment, that's not included in there.
Thank you so much, Danny, Ness and Matt, for this brilliant session. And obviously, thank you to everyone who's joined us today and for your continued engagement, because it has been a really valuable session. Just before we do close, a quick reminder that the next meeting will take place on Wednesday, the 29th of October, and we hope to see you there. So until then, please take care. Please remember the evaluation, and thank you again for being part of today's session.